Okay, so this is the second major part of my story. I had talked about how I had gotten past this addiction of entertainment, and well, there's some things that happened to me that were brought on by the enemy, which were very terrible, but I was saying God used it for good, and God actually had his own work in the midst of it at the same time. So what happened was I began to have this real unease, despite everything that I was doing that was like good, right? I wasn't out there doing anything that I was knowingly doing that was bad. But I began to have this unease about God and about where I was going, and it also had a lot to do with what was being preached at the church I was at. It was very much works based. It wasn't really by the grace of God, and we didn't really have a good understanding of the blood of Jesus and that he saved you. But you'll see how this all worked out, how God used this to bring, God really used this to just blast into my life. So anyways, I had this unease, and it was like a fear, but I began to just, I would go to bed, I didn't have any peace at night. I just did not feel right with God. That's honestly, I didn't know him. It was I would sit there and be like, when was the last time I had an actual experience with God? And I was like, I didn't know him. He seemed so foreign to me. He seemed so distant. I couldn't even remember what he was like. There had been some times when I had had some experiences with him when I was younger. And the first time he touched me, I remember actually falling on the floor as a kid. My knees gave out, and I had this encounter with God in my heart, and I was crying because I realized how good he was. But it had been so long since anything I had ever felt a tangible presence of God. I just had I went to church every day, every week. But as far as knowing God and having a day-to-day, knowing him relationally, I didn't. And that made me scared. I felt and it had to do with it, like I said, what they were preaching at the church, because they made it, it was all about your works, and if you were not doing everything that you could be doing, you could die and not make it into heaven. And it had gotten pretty bad at this point. And so this unease continued, and I began to, in my own way, as best as I could do, to seek God. So I would read my Bible. Hold on a second. I would pray. I would stay up late at night reading my Bible and praying. And I didn't know how to connect with God, so my version of praying was looking up at the sky. God, where are you? Do you hear me? And I literally remember at one time when it was really bad, going outside in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. The unrest was so strong. I went outside and I was just God, where are you? Did you hear me? And just at my wit's end, crying out to him, and it was there was no voice. He did not answer me. It was it was as if he was completely hiding his face. I didn't know where he was, and so I felt I wasn't okay. And so that just made me so scared. I had no, confidence that he heard me. I had nothing, and it was crazy because when I would read the Bible, this is how there's spirit guided, the Lord can guide you where to read in the Bible. Well, the devil guided me where to read in the Bible, because I'd be okay, wherever I'm supposed to open the Bible, let it open up where it's supposed to be at. Open up the Bible, and it would be at Judas, who betrayed Jesus, or it'd be the guy who sold his birthright, Esau. And the enemy had me convinced that because I had done some minor deed that was not right, that I was like Esau, who had sold his birthright and could never get back. And literally everything that I would read, I would just turn pages and it would speak to me these things, which is crazy because the devil can use scripture, and that's what he did to me. Everything I was reading was something that it condemned me. Every time I read it, it was condemning, and I thought it was I just was coming to the Word with this open and honest heart, ready to hear anything God might speak to me. And here is the enemy speaking to me the whole time, and I was taking it as God's voice because I didn't know his voice. So that's the danger of not knowing his voice. So I had this open heart, and I was receiving everything, I was just receiving everything, and anything that the people said on stage, I was receiving. And because I wanted to be honest, and I had this open, honest heart, so I was taking in this condemnation and taking in every reproof, I thought was correction, and the whole time it was the enemy who was condemning me every time. And so yeah, it was awful. Like, it got so bad that, like I said, I couldn't sleep hardly at all. Like, I was barely sleeping. My face began to just draw in, like, I know my face doesn't look good now, but trust me, it looked a lot worse. I was like pale. I was drawn, like my shoulders were like all slumped in, like I couldn't stand up straight. I was just drawn in. And the whole time, like, my parents and my family did not even know I was struggling. They did not even know I was going through this. It was all internal. I never told anybody, because I was trying to deal with it on my own. Like, I was being honest I thought I was being honest in my own heart before God, and I felt like I was trying as hard as I could to do the right thing. This is my way of being so honest in my heart that I took everything, every little inclination, like if I felt like, okay, this sounds really stupid, but like, say I was in my bed and I blew my nose and I threw the tissue on the floor instead of the trash can, my conscience would sit there and be like, you need to go throw that in the trash can. And like, if I didn't do it, it was like, there's this verse in the Bible that says, he that knows to do good and does it not, to him it's sin. Well, that was like what I lived by, except every little thing in my conscience, and like the enemy was using that. So like, it was like me sinning right there because I didn't throw that thing in the trash can. It was horrible. It was down to the nitty gritty. He like was controlling me. And like, okay, I'll give another example. Your friend calls and needs you to do something, and so your conscience says, or no, here's a better one. You see someone that and they need something, and if you don't go get something, go fill that need, your conscience attacks you because you didn't do that. So it's like everything that you see, anything that you could possibly do that's good, you have to do it. And if you don't do it, you're sinning. So you're running around trying to do everything that's good, and you're and anything that your mind tells you that your conscience is telling you to do, you have to do it. And if you don't do it, it's like you have this terrible regret and condemnation in your heart. So it was awful. It was oppression that was terrible, down to my every last move. I was being controlled, and so it was just terrible. Like I said, it got to the point where it was so bad that I remember my mom came over one day, and I said something, like, she said something, and I made this comment, like, as if I wasn't doing good. And she was like, what? Like, you're doing good? What are you talking about? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing good. And at this point, I was fully convinced that, I was like Esau. It was amazing where this took me. Because I remember one day I got on my knees, like, and I was like, prayed to God. I prayed to God and asked him, like, because they said in church, like, if God were to come back tonight, would you be ready? Or they said something like this, or like, what would you do? So I like got on my knees and pretended as if I was going to meet God that night, or something, like as if it was God and me, and I wanted to have the moment now. And I didn't want to wait till later. I want to know right now if I'm okay with him. And so so I got on my knees and I prayed to the Lord if he would show me. And it was very hard for me, because you want to run away. If you feel like you're not going to measure up, you want to run away. You don't want to face the truth. So it was very, very hard for me to get on my knees and ask him, am I right with you, And so, I'm sorry, kitty. So, but I did, and I got on my knees and I prayed, and this terrible feeling came over me, you're not gonna make it. It was terrible, and I believed it. I believed it because that's what I felt in my heart, that I wasn't gonna make it. And because I had asked out of a pure and honest heart, and then that's what I got. So I believed it. I was trying to be so honest, and so I was convinced that I was practically doomed, and I thought, I'm gonna have to leave the church. I'm not even I'm not worthy to be here. I cannot be here. I cannot hold up. I cannot measure up to these standards anymore. I'm gonna have to leave. And so when my mom came over that day and said something about this, I said something like how I wasn't doing good, and I wasn't doing right. She was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, Mom. And then later I began talking with her, and she kind of delved further into it. We talked deeper into it, and I basically convinced her that I tried to convince her that, I was doing things which, I wasn't, I don't even know what it was. It was just that it was kind of like this unknown thing, but I wasn't okay, and I wasn't right with God, and I was terrible. And she was just like, no, you're not. And I'm like, Mom, you don't realize, I knew this in my heart, where I was. And she's like, says something about well, I don't know who said it, if I said it or if Mom said it, but it was why don't you talk to one of the elders of the church and ask them? She was like, if you don't believe me, ask one of them. And I was at such a desperate point, I never talked to the elders of the church, but I was at such a desperate point. I was like, yeah, I will. I'll talk to them. I will confess to them, because they've been talking about people in the church who aren't measuring up, and I knew it was me. I just knew it. And so, it's raining again. I gotta go into the overhang. So, I literally called up one of the elders of the church, a nicer one, one who actually wasn't, he was probably one of the more gentle, nice people, and, I told him, of what I felt from the messages that were being preached, and how I wasn't measuring up, and I knew it, and how, I had asked the Lord, and he had told me that I wasn't going to make it, and, I was literally at my wit's end. So I told him all the truth of what I felt, and he said the same thing as my mom, and he was like, no, you're fine, that is not directed at you, that was for other people, you're fine. And I was like, no, but I feel it in my heart, this is real, I was honest before God. I've had an honest heart, and this is how I feel, and I know it's me. And he was just like, no, and I told him how I've been praying and seeking God. He's like, no, you don't. He was like, you don't need to seek God like that. He was like, you can just know God and seek him. The wisdom of God can be with you. You can just be with your kids and with your family, and God will speak to your heart and give you wisdom. You don't need to be on your floor in the closet and whatever else you're doing. You don't need to do that. He was like, you're fine. And I don't even remember everything else he told me, but I remember experiencing this short burst of relief. It was really? I don't even know if it was anything that he said, but I think it was that confirmation of, because I trusted these guys, they were the elders of our church, and I had always thought that, everything they said was right. And so, so I had to take what he said and what my mom said, even though my heart spoke to me otherwise. I felt like I had to listen to what they said. because I remember, like I said, I experienced this short burst of like relief. It was like, oh my gosh, I started crying because I was like, are you serious? You know, it was such a relief to even think that possibly I really might be okay and this might not be actually the truth of what I was feeling. And so from that point on, it was a struggle because the enemy still tried to keep me under his grasp, and and I was realizing that not everything that comes in here is from God. Like, even if I have an open and honest heart, like, I need to know his voice. I need to know God's voice. And sometimes what I thought was God's voice is not necessarily his voice. And so so I began to just like start letting go of things that I had always believed, and start like, I had to totally reframe my thinking. Like, everything that I had believed, that had built up, that was just built up in my head, it had to kind of come crumbling down a bit. And so it was a very unsure time for me, because like, I would go to church and they'd still be preaching the same thing. It was still just as condemning, and I would go to church and I would be fully convinced again that I was the one that they were after. And then my mom knew I was struggling at this point, so she would have to come reassure me and be like, no, you know what they told you, you know what God's told you, like, it's not you that they're talking about. It was a struggle for me because, yeah, I was constantly still fighting with this belief system that I had let get built up in my head for so long. And like, during the day, if I was just at home, you know, alone, like, the voices would be just attacking me and like condemning, and it was almost impossible not to believe it. You know, it was almost impossible not to believe it. And I would have to go talk to, sometimes if it got really bad, I would call up my mom just in tears, you know, believing it again. And my mom would coach me through just, you know, the truth again. The truth as in, you know, that's not true. You know, that I was believing something that wasn't true about myself. And so I gradually began to like, just try to live again, not to think too hard, not to listen to every voice that came in my head, and to be open, and to not be condemned. But that's the end of this part of the story, because the next story, I thought it was the story that I was going to talk about, the major event, but I think this video's been long enough. I'm going to go save it for this very next video, which is my encounter with God.